I just got out of a great conversation with Jesse KATCHES. I think the all be happy takeaway is people are looking for the truth. They want something that sounds true, that is true. You can call it authenticity if you want. So the takeaway is speak truthfully.
Or sitting on a park bench or like, I don't know, I work out a lot, so doing like a workout and talking like in between sets.
Exactly. I mean, I know in the comedians getting cars, right? When they were at, just the idea that you're moving, right?
Yeah.
So visually it's great. Obviously he's got some amazing guests and the car is a big part. But
right.
And this actually something I want to get into about, but it's interesting that you say you like the working out and doing it over that. I think as long as it's natural, people respond to it, right?
Totally, yeah.
So you got to lean into what you're like. I'm not good at the formal, like when we try to do promos and I have to like look into the video and do something horrible at it.
Yeah.
It takes me a very long time.
Same.
But if it's a candid thing of this, I think it comes off much better.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Have you seen or have you watched Hot Ones?
Oh yeah.
Love that show.
Great format, yeah.
And and so I was talking with my manager about like interesting formats, and they're like, yeah, it would be really great if like you did something like that with a workout, but then you talk and answer questions while you're in an ice bath.
Oh,
and then
that's
it's
cool.
Like your brain is fried.
Yes, I like
something
that.
like that is
or like the last segment is like the ice bath lightning round.
Totally, yeah.
30 seconds.
Exactly.
I'm gonna ask you. That's pretty cool. People love that.
I know. It's just fun to like walk and talk or do something like that breaks the formality of it all.
The formality. And I also think just get your brain working a little differently.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm new to this, so I haven't had like there's questions I have and things, but I could see a situation where I do want to really go through like sort of specific interview.
Right.
I haven't done that yet.
Yeah.
I like the spontaneity that comes out of it.
Totally.
But that's great. So, Jesse, thank you so much for being here. This is amazing. I really appreciate
Thanks for having me.
The time. Greenpoint, I like when we talk to New York people.
Yeah.
So welcome. There's a lot. I'm interested in talking to you because I feel like I'm going to be able to ask you questions about this world of mental health, men's mental health, your own backstory that I think you'll have some interesting insight into. So I'm looking forward to that. But let's start, because as I said, you are a little bit of a mystery man. You're not. But I actually appreciate it. I feel like you're like me. I get the sense maybe you're not great at self-promotion.
I'm really not.
Which I'm not either. And I love that about you. So that's great.
Yeah,
that's great.
It's a bit of that and like this idea that I really do love the platform I built and the following I have. Everyone is amazing. But at the same time, there's still a part of me that's like, I just want to be pretty private. Like I don't want to let people in on every area of my life and like talk too much about my family or anything like that online. And I that's kind of the line I walk. It's like being very vulnerable and open and completely transparent, and also not promoting myself too hard and putting all of myself out there. That's kind of the line I walk, so it might be a mystery to try to find information on me.
I think it's super interesting, and I want to dive into that. I want to get some background on you, but just to set up the thing that I find interesting about what you just said that I want to get into is that is the line.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm very curious today about people who are stepping out, and I think, you said something interesting, if I can sum it up in some of your other interviews, almost like healing through transparency, almost like cathartic healing from other people because they hear you talk so openly. So how do you find that balance? I want to get into that, but step back for a second.
Right.
Tell me a little bit about where you're from, a little bit of the history. I know you from California, right?
Yeah,
Your family's out there. Yeah.
Yeah, Northern California. Little, like we were talking about before, little truck stop on the way to Tahoe. It's like there's a McDonald's, a Starbucks, a Taco Bell, everything you need on your way
like
to your
really
ski
1,000
trip.
people?
It's a town of 1,000 people. My high school had 400 people, but that's because people came from other areas to go to that high school. And so yeah, I grew up there.
Was that the kind of thing you're like, I'm dying to get out of here, or
Yeah,
you enjoyed it?
That's how I felt. Yeah,
it's exactly like the movies. I'm dying to get out.
If you've seen It's a Wonderful Life,
Yeah.
the whole movie, he's like, I got to get out of Bedford Falls, and my parents used to call me George Bailey because I wanted to get out of that town so much.
That's awesome.
And so when college came around, I went down to LA. I was like, let me just kind of get away far enough to leave this area, but still stay in California.
Okay.
So I went down to LA, lived there for like 7 years, and then moved to New York, where I've been here for about 8 years now.
Got it. And leaving, what was the dream? Like, this place was too small for you. You felt you couldn't express. Like, what were you looking for in LA?
Honestly, I think just a little bit of something new and something adventurous.
Right.
It just felt very contained, and I always felt like there was, like I could make an impact, but I couldn't do it in such a small environment.
Yeah.
Now, I mean, with social media, you can do it from anywhere. Right. During that time, there was no social media. I had a flip phone. It was back in those days. So I'm like, how am I going to make an impact and do big things in the world from
without
this place?
without a smartphone.
Without a smartphone and living in the woods and,
Right.
And so so that was my big idea was I just felt like I was meant for something bigger.
Yeah.
And I couldn't do what I wanted to do in that town.
Yeah. It's interesting. I used to live in the city. I now live in a smaller town out Long Island. But I was thinking recently I'd like to dive into the town and find those stories and those roots.
Right,
so
yeah.
I think you're right. I think there probably is a time where I got to step out and go to a larger audience because I have to physically be in a larger audience. But it's interesting to think now, if you were to dive deep into that and just embrace that town and like super local I bet you would resonate, right?
Yeah,
That super
totally.
local content. So that's just interesting.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
It's a great point. Yeah. I mean, I think I forget the exact quote, but it's like, if you want to change the world, start with one person's world, right?
Nice, yeah.
And it is really, what you bring up is a great point, because it's like you're broadening your view to like make this big impact when really you have a town of 1,000 people, and 1,000 people is a lot, and you can make a big impact in one person's life, and that could spread to so many.
Yeah.
So,
but also, as you said, because of the phone and social media gives you such a large audience.
Totally.
So there's probably a million stories in there that resonate with people.
Totally,
but
yeah.
It's just a different way of thinking.
Right.
So California, and then you went to study, I can never pronounce it.
Yeah.
Kinesiology.
Yeah, I didn't want to jump in. I wanted to give you a chance.
No, the funny thing is I have a close friend who's done that. And I've done a few sessions. My wife has, so I'm a little familiar. But was that on your radar, or was that just something you came across?
It was on my radar. I've been someone who has done sports all their life and big into workout. I was a personal trainer for a long time. After going to school for kinesiology. So it was always an interest of mine, but my original interest was going to school for filmmaking. So I wanted to be a filmmaker, an editor, and make movies. Yeah. And some things happened. I was in kind of a relationship at the time, and the girl's dad was like, "You're not going to be a filmmaker." And he told me some stuff that clouded my dream. Yeah, and I was naive enough to listen to him at the time.
Wow.
And so I changed my desire in terms of like my career path, and I went to school for kinesiology instead. So a big passion of mine, but filmmaking, creating videos, and making movies was my first passion for sure.
Just to dig into the weeds on this conversation with your girlfriend's ex, I find that so fascinating. Did he have? Was he like a sort of, you better get a future for my daughter sort of thing?
Yeah.
So it was a serious relationship.
It was not yet.
But he was, that's what I'm wondering.
That was the,
that's funny.
Yeah. It was,
and he's like, not on my watch.
Not on my watch. It was before the relationship even started. He was like, how are you going to provide for my daughter? I was like 16, 17 at the time. Okay. He's like, how are you going to provide for my daughter?
And that was in Colfax.
This was in it was in Colfax area.
Colfax.
Yeah.
But
I
in
forget
small
if I-
town sort of thinking is
small
what I'm
town-
trying to touch
yeah,
on. Like,
yeah. And
That's
so
funny.
yeah, at the time I told him I wanted to be a filmmaker,
Yeah.
and he was like, okay, and he went away, came back like a week later with a packet of papers like this thick,
Yeah.
with like I don't like internet threads of how people people that get into filmmaking start in porn. So he's like, "This is how you're gonna
No.
provide for my daughter."
That's
And I'm
where he
like,
went?
Come on. Yeah,
Jeez.
it was so wild. But again, I was naive enough, and
Well, you're
my
16,
judgment
I
was
mean,
clouded. And
yeah.
yeah, so I was like, okay, well, I'll find a different path.
Oh
But
man.
and fortunately, that relationship didn't work out because
Right.
it would have been a nightmare.
Right.
But I'm happy with the path because I got the the degree in kinesiology,
Yeah.
and then circled back to filmmaking in a different way. Now
Right.
making videos on the internet
Yeah.
that I feel is probably better than the path I would have gone on to start.
So when you moved to New York, that was, again, you had a plan in mind, or what was the impetus to get out of California and move to New York?
No plan in mind.
Just
yeah.
you wanted to be in New York.
Yeah, just wanted to be in New York. Me and my then girlfriend
Yeah.
were working jobs that we just didn't enjoy at
Right.
all. I was in an office working 9 to 5, sitting at basically a cubicle, helping people build websites or sell websites online. And my girlfriend my then girlfriend, now fiance, worked in Disney publishing, just like selling books and stuff she wasn't interested in. So we're like, all right, we're both commuting an outrageous amount of time in LA traffic.
Yeah.
We're both working jobs we don't like. Let's just move somewhere, shake it up entirely. And we took a trip to New York, loved it, and we're like, let's go to New York. So we quit our jobs, packed our bags, took a train out here, had like a 3-month sublet, and found jobs, found a life and a new apartment. And yeah.
That's amazing.
So-
That's amazing. So now your major focus is mental health. I think men's mental health, focus on that.
Yeah,
But you had some life experiences that brought you to that.
totally.
Can you tell me a little bit about, what the impetus, what
Yeah.
inspired you to get into that?
Yeah, so after college, I was working as a personal trainer up in Northern California
Okay.
in that small town. And around that time, I had a long-term relationship I was in. And it wasn't the best relationship at the time, but we were in it for the long haul. But during that time, my brother passed away up in Northern California while I was living up there. And at the same time, basically simultaneously, like a month later, that relationship I was in ended.
Right.
So at that point, I was like, my whole
Whole
world
world,
was
yeah.
shattered. And so I had a really good friend who was like, let's move to LA. This was the catalyst for me going down to LA. He's like, let's just go to LA, start fresh. We'll live together. And I did that. I moved down there with him. And it was great to start. I kind of distracted myself in a way. Moving to LA, I was partying more and just kind of like finally feeling like I was living for me, kind of like a fresh start. But things kind of settled down as I got that office job that I just mentioned before. And sitting in an office every day with a lot of time to think and just sit with my thoughts was not a
Was
good
not what
thing
you
for
needed.
me.
Right.
Yeah, and so I started getting these strange sensations in my body, like burning sensations, electrical shocks, like just spontaneous dizzy spells where I'd just be sitting and feel like extreme vertigo. And I started getting very anxious about it and started having panic attacks every single day at work. And so at that time,
was the panic was about the physical sensations you were feeling?
yeah.
Not the thoughts yet, but just like what's going on.
It was what's
Right,
going
okay.
on, and I feared, I had all the worst thoughts about what was going on inside my body. So I went to multiple doctors, got multiple tests like CAT scans, MRIs, EKGs, EEGs. I got everything. And the whole time they're like, there's nothing wrong with you. You're full of anxiety. And they kept giving me anxiety medication. But I didn't believe them, so I didn't take the medication. And I was like, no, there's got to be something wrong with me. And now looking back, I'm like, well, my brother passed away. I got, had a relationship I was in, and I was partying, and then finally had a chance to sit with my thoughts, and all this anxiety came rushing back. And so,
But when you were having when you had the physical reaction, nothing crossed your mind at that point of
Not
those
at
two
all.
connections?
Not at all. Yeah.
And is that just because you weren't even giving your time to bring that
I
into your
think
life,
so,
to think
yeah.
about that? Yeah.
I think that, and you know, it's like, it's really hard to bring up these kind of thoughts that you're having. I think for everybody, men and women and anyone in between, but I think as men, it's very hard to bring up like, hey, I'm feeling this way. I'm really scared. Like, I don't know what's happening to me with like other male friends. And so I felt like I wasn't in a relationship at that time. I met my girlfriend later. So it was just me living alone and with a bunch of guy friends. And I'm like, I told them I was feeling anxious, but like, I don't think I expressed the depth of it.
Right.
So there was that element too of like, I'm very scared to even tell other people what's happening inside of my body and the thoughts I'm having.
Yeah.
So I think that's something I've learned. It's like, the things you're experiencing can be bad, but what makes it even worse is the fear you have about them and trying to suppress them and trying to push them away. And when you do that and you don't bring it up, you don't talk about it, you suppress it down, then everything magnifies, everything amplifies, and it comes back even stronger.
Yeah.
And so for me at that time, it was just this slew of scary feelings and sensations I was feeling, and not expressing it and not sharing it with my closest friends at all.
Right.
So
You said you expressed it a little bit to the other guys in the house, but no, it wasn't enough for them to register, or is part of the overall conversation, guys don't know how to deal with that.
yeah, I think it was a combination.
Right, right.
Yeah, like I had a good friend who I lived alone at the time, but every day I commuted down to work with a good friend of mine.
Right.
And I would bring up like the fact that I was feeling anxious and like had these doctor's appointments I was going to because like things were going on inside my body. But it wasn't ever like, I don't think I ever fully expressed the depth of pain I was in internally and the fear that I had. And so when I would tell him, it was my fault for like not communicating that thoroughly. It was really hard, but also he didn't really know how. He was like, "Oh man,
like
it sucks. Like, hope you get it figured out." You know,
once you get that fixed, right.
So it's a combination of like not knowing and not being able to fully express it.
Yeah, well, there's definitely things to explore there. I have, you said the idea the fear is almost worse than the thing itself.
Yeah.
And even with my kids, I see, and as they're growing up, just communicate, just talk. It'll be okay, you know? And it's always so much worse in your head. Not to say it doesn't have to be addressed and it's not a real thing, but there is something about keeping it to ourselves that we sort of, our imaginations around it magnify it more, right? So I definitely appreciate that. So just on the physical sort of medical end of it, was there a point where you started taking meds for that, particularly just for the physical stuff?
There wasn't.
No? Okay.
No, I never actually ended up taking them.
I think that's good, right?
Yeah. And that's like, partially I have an aversion to medication, generally speaking. I don't know how in depth we want to go, but my brother who passed away had a lot of drug problems, and that was part of the cause of his death. And so for me, growing up, I always saw a struggle with drugs and medication. So like any prescriptions that I get, I'm very skeptical. I mean, I told you before this, I have a sinus infection and I'm on antibiotics. They gave me the antibiotics. I waited like 2 weeks before I took them because I was like, let's just see if this goes away on its own.
I know. So, I'm with you.
So yeah, so when they prescribed me anxiety medication, I was like, let's see if there's another way. And I'm happy
especially with
I did.
that, because I feel like it's such a slippery slope.
Totally,
into that. I'm supposed to be taking cholesterol med, and first of all, I forget to take it often, but she's told me to take it for a while. I'm like, no, let me see. And then I always forget to take it, so I got to go. But I agree. It's, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Finding the right balance.
Totally, yeah.
So then there comes a point where you decide, I want to sort of step out with this thing and talk about it more. Yeah. And what is that? How does that take shape?
So, so around the time I was going through these, this bout of anxiety and panic attacks, I actually met my now fiance.
Congratulations!
Thank you. I appreciate it.
So that was how long ago?
We've been together for 9 years.
Oh, okay.
8 or 9 years
Got it.
now. Yeah. So we've lived in New York for 8 years, been together for 9 years.
Great.
And so I met her right around that time that I was like really in the depths of these anxious experiences. And while we were like in the honeymoon stage, getting to know each other, I was still experiencing this extreme anxiety. And one day I was home alone at my studio apartment in Santa Monica, and I was just watching a movie, eating a pizza, having a good night, like nothing crazy.
Alone, or she was there with you?
Alone.
Okay.
She was at work.
Okay.
And I all of a sudden my heart started pounding, and I had the worst panic attack of my life. I texted her. I was like, something's really wrong with me, and she was at work, so she couldn't respond. So I was like, I have nobody to talk to, and I started getting more anxious, and I thought I was having a heart attack. I thought I was dying, so I called 911, and they showed up. They assured me it was just a panic attack, but they gave me some like techniques that I've shared in my videos now to do to like calm the vagus nerve and the heart palpitations and things. But at that time, it kind of was rock bottom for me, because I was like, this is not getting any better. It's only getting worse. This is now affecting my life to the point where I need to call 911 because I feel like I'm having such a severe panic attack. And so at that point, I started looking for basically anything that could help me. Like, again, social media wasn't a big thing, so I started like going on forums, anything that could help me like break through this anxiety and figure out a way to get through it without medication. And after, searching, YouTube was around at the time, YouTube videos, like Reddit posts, any internet forum, I came across this book called Dare by Barry McDonough.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if you're familiar, but it's the single best resource for anxiety that I've ever come across.
I've heard you speak about it, and so I looked it up just to get slightly familiar with it, but not in depth.
Yeah. So it's the book. I remember right after the panic attack, as I started looking, I came across this book. I downloaded the audiobook, and I started listening in my kitchen while washing dishes, and I immediately started crying my eyes out, because I'm like, this is the first time that I've ever heard anybody talk to me or talk about the things that I'm experiencing in my body and in my head. Intrusive thoughts, the physical sensations of like electrical shocks and burning and things like that.
He was describing
my experience to a T. Wow. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm not the only one. There's hope, because if somebody else has been through this and now they're good enough to write a book and help millions of other people, then there's hope for me too, and I can get through it too.
Yeah.
And so that book, that panic attack, and then finding that book was the biggest pivotal point in my my life in terms of my mental health and my anxiety.
How did you find the book?
I honestly, I just started Googling and looking at forums and just happened to come across it.
I mean, that's the sort of a little magic in that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. So, so that resonated with you, and you've spoken about this before in a couple of other interviews, which I think is an important topic to me in regards to hospitality, and it's the idea of not feeling alone.
Right.
Yeah. And so talk to me a little bit about that. I mean, the power of suddenly feeling like you're the only one, and that now there's other people that hear you. I mean, what does that mean to you? How does that resonate?
I mean, it means everything, because that's, I feel, finding out I wasn't alone was the biggest boost I need, the only boost I needed to know there was a way to get better and to have hope. Before when I felt like I was the only one experiencing the things I was experiencing, I felt hopeless. I felt alone. I felt like I was doomed, in that my future was only going to get worse and worse. But once I found out that I wasn't alone, that changed everything. And I felt like, okay, life can get better from here. Yeah. And that slight switch of like, my future is awful versus things can get better, changed everything. So now I think on social media, as I make videos, sometimes I'm like, I feel like I need to give these big insights and these big, these new tools and techniques for people to feel better. But oftentimes it's the most amount of messages I get from people that are like the most impactful are people just saying like, I didn't know anyone was experiencing this. now that you've posted something about it, I see there's so many other people, thank you, that changed everything for me.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's literally just like showing people they're not alone. That can make the biggest difference in someone's life.
So it's so interesting. And I tell this to the staff in the cafe. Hospitality is my biggest point. I mean, anybody can learn to make great coffee, and I think our coffee is great. But I think what's required for great hospitality is exactly this. That, you know, I tell them, when somebody walks in the door, at least the first time, and you've had this sort of customer experience, you don't know if they're really with you.
Right.
You know.
Yeah.
So the sooner they can feel like these are my people and I'm not alone in this experience, you know, it makes a difference. So that's,
Totally.
I love that from a hospitality perspective. I notice a couple of trends, which is what I want to give with you because you'll be able to speak to it. One, the rise in awareness of mental health.
Yeah.
And two, the rise in people like yourself, and this is not like I gotcha thing, who are not doctors, right?
Yeah, totally.
But there's a generation, I think, again, of people who are looking to people like you for healing simply because they're saying the things that they're feeling.
Right. Yeah.
And so there's obviously a lot of responsibility with that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it also gets back to what you were saying of how much, you know, what is that line that you share,
totally.
right?
Totally.
So I guess just speak a little bit about, I guess, more how you connect to your audience in that way.
Mm-hmm.
You know, what is the service you're providing? Where do you go from here? You know, how do you keep that conversation going in a way that's useful?
Yeah, there's a few things to.
Yeah, I threw a lot out there, but that's what I was so interested in. You know, because again, people can find anybody online.
Yeah,
right?
Totally.
And I think there's certainly a value to people just saying what's on their heart and mind.
Mm-hmm.
But it's also a wide range.
There's
a lot of people.
There's value
you know?
to it, and there's a lot of concern to it as well. Yeah.
So I guess how do you find that balance? You know.
Totally. Yeah. It's something I battle with every day. I mean, even the video I posted yesterday, I won't get into like the details of it, but I bounce back and forth between this thought of like, is this accurate, or is it just like something I feel that maybe isn't true for everybody? Right. And I battle with that a lot, but yeah, I think there's a lot of value in. I mean, I think I go back to my experience and when I was feeling in my lowest and in the depths of my anxiety, I was going to doctors. And not to speak poorly of doctors, it's just the system is designed to go to school, learn that it's like an algorithm. It's like when somebody exhibits X, Y, and Z, I'm going to do ABC, you know, give them a pill or give them this treatment or send them to another specialist. And that's just kind of the way things go. And so when you go to a doctor, you're looking for answers in terms of like, help me solve this. But they don't typically, in my experience, go into like, why are you feeling this way? What is your experience in life? And so I feel a lot of times that can lead to people not being seen, I guess what I'm getting at. And so online, though, I've made it very clear I'm not a doctor at all.
Yeah.
Please go see a doctor if you're experiencing anything. Like I make that very clear. But I think seeing somebody who is not a doctor, who doesn't have the answers, who's not trying to figure it out, but just makes you feel seen and your experience validated and can share an experience that they've also been through that you're going through. It's like going to a restaurant, you know. You look at reviews beforehand from people who have been there before. You don't ask the restaurant like, hey, how's your pasta? They're going to be like, it's great.
I always wonder why people do that. What do you like? They're just going to say anything. Or is the pasta good? No, it's horrible.
Yeah, like
Every
they're not
once
going
in
to
a while,
tell you.
You get a waiter who's like, I recommend.
Exactly, yeah.
It's like.
But yeah, I kind of equate it to that. It's like, if you're going to a doctor, it's like going to the restaurant and being like, hey, how's your pasta? They're going to say it's good and serve you the pasta. But if you're going to people who have eaten there before, they're going to be like, you know, it was a little too spicy, or like my pasta wasn't cooked well.
Right.
And you get their authentic experience. And I think that's the same thing on social media. It's like, I don't have all the answers. I can't I'm not a therapist. I can't prescribe any medication. And knowing that, I think people trust me more because I have no vested interest. I'm just like, this is my experience. This is what I've been through. And this is what's worked for me. And people can see that. And if they resonate with my similar experience, then they can try the things I've tried, and hopefully it will work for them too.
Right. Well, I think the key word you touched on and what's coming through as you're talking is trust. And I wonder, listen, there isn't a rise in mental issues. There's always been mental, right? But there's certainly a rise in the awareness and talking about them.
Totally, yeah.
But I think a lot of the stress of life comes from not knowing, right? So I got to meet life. How do I do it? What are my principles? How do I navigate it? What is my North Star? Right? And I wonder if generationally those waters have become less clear. What are the things I value? I see what other people value, all these things. So now there's voices online where at least they hear something that is just real.
Right.
I mean, even I think that's honestly what people want for government as well. Like, forget about whatever side you're on. They just want somebody to say one honest.
Yeah. Right.
That has the good and the bad and the ugly.
Right.
Around it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think that's really interesting. The idea of people looking for trustworthy sources.
Yeah. Yeah. And going back to that, that's a good point. I think you're 100% accurate that, people want trust and want transparency. I think there's like Dr. Mike. Do you know Dr.
No.
Mike? I think it's Dr. Mike.
Okay.
He's a doctor that's become a social media presence. And he has that authority
an actual
and
doctor,
the
right.
trust value now because he's been transparent and shared his life.
Yeah.
So I think there's a big space for doctors to do that and people in the medical profession to do that. But it is about building that trust, and people like Dr. Mike are doing that because he has both the expertise and the transparency now. So yeah, I think you're right. It's just like people gravitate towards. I think our people gravitate towards authenticity now because I think our gauge for fakeness, and I don't know if I can cuss on this, but like our bullshit meter is like, it's just like
Quentin,
it's
can we cuss on this?
Okay, great. Yeah, our bullshit meter is just like heightened now because everything seems so fake on social media, and people are craving like raw, real, just open conversations, and so I think you're right about that, and I think that's why like there's an open space right now for people to step into, and if you have the authority and the trust and the transparency, I think it's a really good space to step into and be very, very helpful and provide a lot of impact.
Yeah. And do you find also on your end there must be a freedom to it? I mean, in a way you're speaking to the world. I mean, forget about whatever the actual numbers, it doesn't matter. The potential is you're out there speaking.
Yeah.
How do you find that benefit for you?
Yeah, I think it's super beneficial. And it could go either way, but I think there is a level of it being therapeutic for me because I get to experience something and then work through it in a way that explains it to somebody else. And typically, in my experience, I've found that if I'm teaching something, that's the best way to learn. And it's the best way for me to work through something as well. Like if I'm experiencing anxiety and I'm like, all right, somebody else might be experiencing this for this reason too. Let me look up why I might be experiencing it, or like dig deeper into that and then communicate it to somebody else. And that helps me work through a lot of stuff that I've experienced on my own. But I think it could work in the opposite way as well, because when you're researching a topic or like deep into something, it becomes your life. So I'm very careful in my content to not only talk about anxiety, because I don't want anxiety to be my life. And
it's a good call.
And the brain, I mean, like from everything I found, like the subconscious doesn't understand like don't. So if you're like, don't think about this plant, you're going to think about the plant. The subconscious doesn't take in don't. It's just like plant, bricks, wall, whatever. So if I'm like talking about always investing my time into helping people not feel anxious.
Yeah.
My focus is always on anxiety and anxiousness, and it could be on like helping people, but it's like anxiety is the topic of conversation. So I'm very careful in my content to mix in things I really enjoy talking about, like mindset, positive mindsets, and positive psychology and things like that, because I think it's too easy to like make your topic your life, and you have to be very careful about like what you're making your life.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. There's a I don't know if it's a quote or a phrase I really like that says, "What you give your attention to grows."
Yeah.
Right. And one of the questions I had for you was, can we talk too much about it?
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot.
Yeah,
right? There's
totally.
a lot of conversation where
Absolutely.
even I just look at my own life. Sometimes it's like, okay, I'm done. Like, just, I don't know, move on in a way. So do you? And I think that's sort of what you're saying. You can't talk too much about it.
I think so.
Yeah.
I think so. From my experience, I think it's like if you get a bad, I'll bring it back to hospitality because we were talking about that before. Like if you get a bad dish at a restaurant and you just only continue to talk about that bad dish, like maybe the dessert's really good, but you're just stuck on that bad dish. And or like the next restaurant you go to, you're like, oh, I hope it's better than the last pasta I got, right? And so I think like when you invest all your time in talking about one thing, it brings your focus to that quote, where your focus goes, your energy flows, right? And so I think focusing too much on any topic, especially if it's one that is debilitating in some way, all your energy is going to go to how negative things are, how bad things are, and how bad you feel. And so I do think there's a time where it's like, all right, let's not focus on the anxiety that's holding us back, but let's focus on what we want in life and use that anxiety to propel us towards that. I wrote a little ebook, and that was kind of the main focus. It's a very short, I think like 20-page ebook about anxiety, but one of the big parts is like, all right, now that we've like found out ways to handle the anxiety we're feeling in the moment, let's forget about anxiety and let's shift towards the bigger goals in life. And then as we focus on those goals, we might feel anxiety, but you make the focus like where you want to go next, not what's holding me back right now. And I say it in a very non-elegant way compared to the ebook, but like that's kind of the main idea.
I want to ask you about your process of the sort of content and videos and how you do that, but it sounds odd because we were just saying don't focus on it too much, but I do want to talk a little bit about your dive into anxiety or this topic in general. I guess highlight the practices or what you've learned, or you mentioned this word intrusive thoughts a lot. Can you define what that is even,
I think intrusive thoughts, I don't know a proper definition, but
your practical definition.
My practical definition is unwanted, disturbing thoughts that continue to reoccur. Just any thought that's disturbing in nature that you don't want but continues to make its way into your head.
Would you put general distractions into that, or do they have to be disturbing? Meaning like, I'm working on a project and either I'm focused on something else or I'm worried about the result or what's going to, the future. Is that included in that or no?
It could be in a way. When I speak about it in particular, I wouldn't include that. I would say that's my general lack of focus.
Got it. Okay.
And like maybe my catastrophizing.
Right.
Yeah, and
but it can produce anxiety,
that could be. It could.
But you're talking about those real things that cause that.
For me, when I speak about it, it's like it's hard to describe in terms like, I mean, if we want to go deep into it, there was a period where like I was scared to be around a knife. Because I was like, I'm scared that I'm going to pick it up and hurt myself or somebody else. So like
that's an intrusive thought.
For me, like those violent intrusive thoughts are like the scare, or like being on a high ledge and feeling like you're going to lose control of your body and jump off or something. Like for me, those are the scary intrusive thoughts that the more attention you give them, the scarier they are. And the stronger they become because you're feeding so much fear into them. But at the heart of it, again, an intrusive thought is an unwanted thought, like
Right.
an unwanted, disturbing thought. So if you're having the thought, it means you don't want to do it, and you're so scared of doing it that it's like it's intruding into your mind. And so really the comfort is like the intrusive thoughts you're having, it means you really, really don't want to do it, and you can't do it. Your brain can't make you do anything you don't want to do. You're not going to, do something like jump off a ledge or whatever.
Right,
So
meaning
it's
that
like,
you're saying that the good thing is there's resistance to
yeah,
that
the
thought.
resistance
Right.
is the comfort,
Yeah.
but the resistance makes it stronger as well.
Yes, got it.
So,
Got it. Now, and again, part of this is an ignorant question. Do you have a mythology that you practice during the day to hold these things at bay? Is this something you doesn't affect you as much as it used to, or is this a constant practice for you?
It's a bit of both. It doesn't affect me nearly as much as it used to, but it is a constant practice. And one of the reasons, rewinding back to listening to Dare for the first time, that book, one of the reasons I broke down crying was because they talked about this very topic in there. And that was the absolute first time I heard anybody talk about intrusive thoughts. And at that time, I was like, they were flooding my mind so much that I thought I was going crazy. And that was one of the big things I was really scared to tell anybody about. And in that book, the process they go through works for intrusive thoughts as well. It works for anxiety, intrusive thoughts, and it's an acronym. I feel like I promote this book so much. Like, Barry McDonough, you're the man. Yeah, and the acronym they go through is it's DARE, which is the name of the book, and it's diffuse, accept and allow, I think, run towards, and engage with life again. And basically, the D, diffuse, works very well for intrusive thoughts. It's like you have this thought that's so scary by nature, but if you diffuse it and add levity to the situation, like, so what? Like, if I chop off my hand, so what? I'll get a bionic arm. It's like you make a light of the situation, kind of turn it into a joke, diffuse it, so it takes the power away from it. Because, again, the fear of the thought, the fear of the thing is what fuels it. And the more you resist it, the more it persists and gets stronger and stronger. So that diffusion and then accepting it, like, so what? I'm feeling anxious. So what? I'm having these thoughts. Like, oh, well, like, let them come on. And then you run towards it. And it's like, can I make my heart pound harder? Can I have more of these thoughts? Like, you actively try to feel more of it. And then you engage with life again. Like, if I'm feeling anxious or like anxious in this situation, we just continue to talk. And I'm like, all right, let me feel more anxious. Let me just talk a bit more and engage with life again. So.
But do you find when you engage with life, the anxiety goes away a little bit? Because I find that.
Yeah, totally. And especially if you are not resisting it and you're feeling more of it and you're like leaning into it. I think that's the biggest thing for me in terms of what has changed in my life the most is I used to be very resistant to feeling any anxiety at all, to having any intrusive thoughts at all. And now I try to lean into it as much as I can. And that one shift, I think, for everybody is probably the most impactful thing you could do, is not run from the negative or the bad things you're feeling, but instead lean into them and accept it.
Yeah, it resonates a lot. I've been part of this place called the School of Practical Philosophy for 30 plus years. It's out of New York. Eastern philosophy, meditation, this kind of thing, which I love. It's a major part of my life. In essence, it's about finding your true self, your authentic self, right? But what resonates with what you're saying is early on, there's an idea of what that is, a sort of a perfect vision of what it would mean to be wise and enlightened, right? And I found a big shift when I let room for all those things. Like, all those things can be happening.
Right.
And you're not at fault, you're not to blame, you're not worse off. The idea is to observe them happening.
Right.
And so there is this sort of acceptance of it, like that's part of the work. And it was a major shift. Somehow it just, it's like embracing the messiness of life, but knowing that there's still an aspect of you which is absolutely okay.
Right.
But if you push them away, there's somehow this denial which just never leaves one feeling settled.
Yeah.
So that's the way I hear what you're saying. There's an acceptance of that the mind can be a pretty messy place.
Totally. Yeah.
But you can still move forward despite that. And I think when I asked about, do you find engaging in life settles the anxiety? I find it does. And that's when I realized sort of being present with life is stronger than the anxiety.
Totally.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Not always easy. You have to push through it sometimes, but I find it does settle at a certain point.
Yeah.
The fear settles.
Yeah.
When you realize, I'm okay, I'm in this conversation. And
Yeah.
one moment I was really nervous, now.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And that is, I mean, anxiety in general, I think it's, it's strongest when you're thinking about how bad it's going to be, right?
Right.
And when you get into that situation, usually it's like, oh, this isn't as bad as I thought. Like, again, I get nervous before every podcast.
Right.
I'm just like, public speaking for me is still a struggle. It's something that I actively try to work on. And I get, when I'm in like a public speaking situation, I get really shaky, my voice shakes, and physically I feel like people can tell how nervous I am. And so going on to podcast and being in these situations beforehand, I get nervous.
You wouldn't know it, by the way.
Oh,
So.
I appreciate that. Thank you. But yeah, once you're here, and so in my head, I'm like, oh, I'm going to be shaky. My voice is going to shake. I'm going to shake, especially having someone in the room with us too. I'm like, oh, an audience now too. But when you get here, and in every situation that you feel nervous about, it's like, oh, it's just a conversation. It's just a few people in a room having a conversation about things that matter and that I'm passionate about. And usually the anxiety at least subsides a bit, especially if you allow yourself that room, that space to be like, let me just have a conversation and not focus on performing, not focus on being anything more than I am, but just having a conversation, and whatever flows, Yeah. And I think that's the hardest part. It's like letting go of the expectations of the way things should be and accepting whatever comes out in the moment.
Being there for, who just, David Lynch just passed away.
Right. Yeah.
So one of my favorite directors, and he's been an avid meditator for many years. But what I really respect about him is I feel like he's a master at that. I mean, whether you like his particular crafts and art or not, I think he's so true to himself in whatever idea comes to his head.
Totally.
That it's not even about, his likes or dislikes. I think he's so true to what the moment is presenting.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we're talking about,
totally.
of being able to be so present that you're just true to what's happening in the moment. And that's the good thing. So even in this interview, I mean, there's preps and I do something, but the great part of it is to see where we can go without a net.
Right. Yeah.
That's where it becomes interesting.
Yeah.
So you have this platform now, YouTube mostly. You're also on Instagram.
Mostly Instagram. Some YouTube.
Okay.
Although my focus is shifting this year, and I want to do a lot more YouTube.
You want to do more YouTube.
Yeah.
So how do you think about that? How do you grow that? How do you go about? You said some of it is anxiety, some of it is growth mindset things.
Yeah.
Just from sort of practical, sort of day-to-day inside baseball stuff, how do you play in that world,
Yeah. I think it kind of goes back to what we were talking about before, and that is not trying to be like an expert, not trying to be performative, not trying to be something more than you are, but again, keeping it transparent and keeping it based on your own experience. And I think there's different ways you can go about building a following. It's like, if you don't have the information, you could interview people who do and post that content online. If I wanted to get very scientific and technical about it, I could just talk to doctors and then have those conversations be my content. But
do you think about that, or do you think about sort of what the future holds for you in this?
Yeah, for sure. I never want to be like the super sciencey person, because that's just not me by nature.
Right.
Like, it's hard for me to keep a schedule. It's hard for me to I'm very in the moment in general, and And I've resisted that a lot, but like I'm trying to adapt my life around that now. But yeah, so like I think for me, being open and transparent and like trying to tell my own personal experience in creative ways and find more creative ways to do that. That's what interests me. And I think I like the YouTube setting because you can get a little more cinematic with it. You can like draw some things out a little bit longer and go deeper into a topic, which I do love. I love like getting into the science of it all. I just don't like being the sciencey guy. I like emotion, like making people feel something is what I really, really want to do, because I think that when people feel strong emotion, that's when they change the most, and that's when an idea resonates the most. And for me, going back to Dare, that's what hit me the hardest. Is that book. It wasn't because they explained the science of how the brain works and thought patterns. It was because they said something that struck a deep emotional chord and made me feel something, and that changed the rest of my life, changed the trajectory of my life. So I want to do that for other people, and I'm really interested in YouTube because I think you have a longer opportunity to do that, and you can connect deeper and make people feel even more. The nature of short form is kind of hard to do that. You can make people feel something, you can spark emotions, but it's like so snappy that you lose them so quickly. But I think you have a longer chance and a stronger opportunity to build a more involved community on YouTube. But yeah, to go back to your question though, in terms of like how to do it, I think honestly just continuing to be open and transparent and talk about experiences that people share, but add some insights that may be valuable for how to navigate those.
Do you, like a writer, do you every day sit down and plan stuff out or write some stuff, or is that a daily activity for you?
Usually, at least a little. Some days the ideas are flowing and I can just sit there and write. Other days I sit there at the computer with the intention of writing, and I get nothing out for hours.
Right.
And I get distracted or lose focus, go on YouTube, go on Instagram, whatever. So I try to make it a daily practice, but nothing good not something good. Not every day is a day that something good comes out.
Got it.
So.
Yeah. I like what you said about the film and we talk about that as well here. I'm in no way an expert in any of the social media and all that. I want to put out stuff that I like. And I agree. I feel like my space is also as short as I could get to have that little impact.
Right.
And I want it to be cinematic. I want it to be. So we're experimenting a lot with that right now, trying to do some stuff in the cafe. And even we did this great, on our Instagram, you see it, this great collaboration with a local dance company.
Oh, cool.
And I was really excited about it because first we have these amazing dancers, beautiful dancers, and dance tells so much. And we did these 4 little vignettes around, and I really wanted it to be, I kept saying, it's got to be like sexy and romantic. Like, it's got to be a moment.
Right.
And you got to see. And so it was really nice, how these 2 people meet in a park. And can you create that moment where somebody, just you said, it opens their heart.
Right.
Somebody said a great quote one time, which they said that the purpose of art was to open the heart for those who can't open it themselves. I was like, oh, that's great.
Yeah.
Like sometimes people just have a really open heart, but the idea that you could see something and it does that, I think is beautiful. So it's, you're talking about this also. I love the film perspective, finding there's something more quality.
And that was like I said, I think we were rolling in the beginning, I wanted to be a filmmaker when I was a kid.
Which you should go back to. That's what's in your heart, right?
Yeah. And that is, I feel in some small, different kind of way, that's what I'm doing now. It's passable for me now. I don't know if now at this point I want to go and be on a set and direct an entire movie. I don't know if I have the passion enough to do that now, but it's fun that I get to tell those stories now. And for me growing up, my dad was a UPS driver, and he used to deliver to this video rental store. and he got to become really good friends with this guy. And he would always give my dad boxes of VHS tapes to take home because they were just duplicates that he didn't need.
That's
So
cool.
my dad would come home with these boxes of movies, and then me and my brothers and friends would watch these movies and then go recreate them. We had a little VHS camcorder,
nice, awesome.
and we'd go recreate them and try to like tell our stories and adapt them to our own way. And that's how I got into making movies and then editing, and it got more and more advanced as we got further. But I just continue to go back to like feeling so, scared or excited or like passionate about a movie I saw. So I always had this passion for making these videos. And I think I want to do something like that. And what you're saying, I want to make it cinematic. I want to bring back those childhood feelings and emotions and bring it into my content while providing value and something that is life-changing,
Yeah. That's awesome. I want to ask you one more random question that struck me from a while ago. Has to do with your fiance.
Yeah.
You said she met you at a time when you were sort of going through all this.
Yeah.
And she stuck with you.
Yeah.
And so just speak to that a little bit. I mean, that's really interesting. It was a new relationship.
Right.
But she stuck with you. I don't know. I sort of want to just recognize that because I think that's pretty cool.
Totally, yeah.
Anything? Can you speak to that a bit? I mean, what?
I mean, we should call her and
we
ask
should
her
call
why.
her. I would love to know. I think.
Yeah.
I almost find that rare. She could have been like, "Hey, I don't want." And now you guys are engaged. So.
Totally, yeah. So after that major panic attack that I talked about earlier, I recently went back and like. I still somehow have the text messages saved from there if I scroll back far enough. And I remember, or I looked it up later, I asked her, I sent a text, I was like, hey, like this is obviously impacting my life in a big way, in a big negative way. And I know like we're pretty new. Are you sure you want to be with me? Are you sure you want to stick with me through this? I sent her a text like that. And she basically said like, yeah, I'm with you. I'm here for you. And she's never.
That's amazing.
She's never showed otherwise. Yeah.
Let's give her a shout out.
I know.
That's great.
Yeah.
I think that's really beautiful. It's
it really is.
Beautiful.
Yeah. I'm kind of blown away and impressed and feel loved and awe about it.
It's
especially
also,
when it comes up in conversation like this.
It's also an interesting sign that you were talking about just the fear of saying what's on your mind.
Yeah.
You felt very comfortable to say that with her. I mean, that's a great indication that she's the right one.
True. At that point, it was like, there's no hiding it.
There's no hiding it.
Like, I was in a really bad spot and felt like I had no other options, really. And so, it's a huge testament to her and her loyalty and her support. She's a special girl.
That's
for sure.
great. Well, we need good partners in our life are critical. So it's good to call them out. Jesse, this has been amazing. Thank you so much. It's been so enjoyable. Thanks for diving into this world that I don't know much about. So it's great and best of luck and everything going forward, man. Thank you.
Yeah, this has been amazing. I appreciate you having me on.
All right, great. Be good. Thanks.
Cool.
That was great, man. Thank you. Really enjoyed that.